everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of our FM COVID-19 series. And this week we're going to talk about how to prepare for relapses and closures. We've got an excellent panel lined up, but before we get to that, I want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. So everyone's audio has been muted for quality purposes, and we are doing a Q&A at the end of the session, so please submit your questions into the question box in the GoTo panel, and we'll get to that towards the end of the session. Also, before we start, we want to say thank you to all the facility professionals. Today is World FM Day, and we are celebrating that. You can go to worldfmdayinfo.ifma.org for more information. And we have Colette Temick, and she is going to be moderating today's session. And Colette is the president of Property Services at Eden. She's responsible for enabling companies to seamlessly run and scale their real estate portfolios using technology. She also oversees strategy, delivery, and quality of property services being delivered to enhance workplace performance. So now let me turn it over to Colette.
Terrific. Thanks, Chris. So welcome and thank you for attending today's webinar. On behalf of the panelists and myself, we'd like to celebrate and recognize facilities professionals globally, and especially thank the essential workers who support the built and the physical environments. We're excited to be hosting this webinar on World FM Day 2020. So thank you for sharing this time with us, and we're excited to be sharing this time with you. As the IFMA chair, John Carrillo, actually shared a few weeks ago, the FM manager's job during COVID is to mitigate risk, ensure that we've taken the steps to protect life and property, and provide an optimum environment to promote productivity. And with this as the foundational objective, we've captured lessons learned during the near term to help determine what we can adopt and what may be best to adopt long term. So please allow me to introduce our esteemed panelists. First, we have Edward Wagner, who is a director and digital chief information officer at JLL. Edward has over 30 years of industry experience, including 15 years as CIO of JLL. And Edward spends a majority of his time with clients leveraging unique and industry-leading expertise to help them create and implement the right real estate technology strategies. It enables their workplace to become more productive, profitable, collaborative, and to attract the best talent. He also goes by Eddie, so welcome. Next, we have Lori Rowlandson, who is the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Innovation at BGIS. Lori works globally with clients and the BGIS team members to identify and implement high-value real estate solutions and strategic transformative initiatives. Lori is also a highly sought-after industry expert who speaks on many topics around emerging trends, innovations, and is really considered a thought leader in our industry. So a special thank you to Lori for joining us today. We appreciate it. And then we also have Joe Dubay, who's the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Eden, which is a leading workplace platform provider. During his time at Eden, Joe has guided the development of the software with a mission of really helping create a better place to work for everyone. This includes making it easier for facility managers, property managers, tenants, and occupiers and service providers to manage their workplaces and deliver services. So they really develop software to manage the workplace and a services marketplace to help maintain it. During his tenure at Eden, he has scaled the platform to 25 major global metros. And prior to Eden, he began his career in finance, working in M&A investment banking with Lehman Brothers and a few other well-known private equity firms. Joe also helped scale Mind Matters SF, which is the largest volunteer educational nonprofit in the Bay Area. And he is a graduate with his MBA from Stanford and his undergraduate from the University of Michigan. So welcome.
Thank you.
And the anchor of this high-powered team is Daryl Smith, who is a Senior Director of Global Workplace, Real Estate, and Facilities at Micron Technologies. At Micron, Daryl manages a global team responsible for delivery of all aspects of the workplace services to support Micron's mission to define what the world can do with data through memory and storage solutions. He has spent his career at the intersection of real estate, big data and technology, and Daryl believes using technology as an enabler for driving data-driven decisions. And prior to Micron, Daryl was Director of Technical Services and Strategy at Google, where he had responsibility for the development of the strategy, policies, and standards for Google's ground-up and TI renovations, developing Google's lab strategy, smart building strategy, and teaming with the development teams on driving FM innovation in their ground-up construction. And his first assignment at Google was Director of the Bay Area facilities for their headquarters portfolio. Prior to this, Daryl was instrumental in developing Microsoft's smart building offering globally and was a key member of the Microsoft Real Estate and Facilities leadership team. So thank you all for joining us. Now I want to just briefly touch upon our agenda today. I'll briefly define kind of adaptive triggering and what it is. Edward will share potential changes for how we occupy and manage space. Then Joe will discuss how to increase service delivery flexibility through technology, followed by Lori with strategies and innovations to help manage the physical space in the future. And Daryl will share a frontline perspective from his corporate vantage point. And time permitting, we'll conclude with Q&A. So again, please submit your questions by clicking the Q&A button at the either on the bottom or the side of your screen. So let's talk about adaptive triggering, which has also been referred to as the hammer and the dance and a few other colorful terms probably over the last few months. And it's a term that's used to describe the cycle of changes in periods of regulatory restrictions and relaxations. So for example, shelter in place, and then workplace reentry. And for some of you who actually manage a global portfolio, this becomes more complex in different geographies and maybe different points in time impact. So for example, you may have one region of the globe that is moving into shelter in place because of an increase in cases, and another where they're actually moving towards workplace reentry. And how do you balance that in that global portfolio? And we're also seeing different timelines within individual countries. So the new normal is not proving to be predictable or stable in a real estate portfolio. And this will impact facilities management in many ways, from service delivery to how we use space, safety considerations, cost, risks, just to name a few. So companies will be considering different strategies as they contemplate progressing from surviving to thriving in the coming years. And central to this success will be the agility and ability to adapt and change. And many would have considered some of these strategies as unimaginable in the past. So the world is changing, and hopefully the panel today can really give you some insights. So now I'd like to turn the mic over to Edward to share his insights on the potential changes for how we occupy and manage space. So thank you.
Thanks, Colette, and thank you to everybody for your time. And since I'm talking to IFMA, take a moment to express my appreciation for what all of you and your teams are doing out there on the front lines. We were talking before, Daryl and I were talking, almost overnight, you guys helped our people move from the workplace to home, and you're going to be on the front lines as we figure out how we bring people back. So I just want to express my appreciation. I've said for years that real estate people touch everybody in the world, and I think the most recent events prove the impact that we have and the impact that you're going to have on all of us going forward. So thank you for that. Colette mentioned that my topic was changes to how we occupy and manage space. Let's just start with a strong statement. It's changed. It's permanently changed, and it's going to change every day. As you get up every morning, you see new things that have happened around the world. You see new things coming out. We hear our health officials saying that we will potentially be dealing with waves or outbreaks. You see new things about the virus. So what we talk about today, there may be new information tomorrow. There probably will. There's going to be new thoughts on how we act, react, re-enter the workplace. So to that end, I would actually invite anyone that wants to discuss further or have ideas or even debate. If you think that I'm wrong about something, challenge me. I'd ask my other panelists, we can see you on video, so if I say something you disagree with, make a face, say no, jump in, because I think we all will get better together. You're creating a safe workplace for your people in your company has a direct impact on me. It has a direct impact on the other tenants in the building. It has a direct impact on families, and it has an impact on our economy as we try to get our companies back up and operating and people back into the workplace. I'll start by saying that a lot of my interactions the last several weeks have been on CIO calls from some of the big CIO industry groups, and I'll mention some things that some of our CIOs and the corporations are thinking, but then also the benefit of JLL and its extensive client base. It's literally a who's who across various industries that are reaching out and talking about what they're doing, and so I'll share some of those insights. And I know Lori's got a lot of those also that she'll be sharing. And then Daryl, you're right there on the front lines, so if you think that I misstate something or want to add to something, jump in. So a couple of thoughts. I've spent my career trying to convince people that we could use the real estate space in our offices more effectively and efficiently. Daryl and I were talking about this before. I think we've won that argument. We went from whatever flexibility you were to almost 100% in most of the office portfolios. We know when we come back that we are probably going to be, as you can see in this experience journey, reacting to things that we see in the workplace, reacting to health information, and restructuring our space. One of the things that we've talked about a lot is in the open plan. We don't believe the open plan will go away, but it's going to change. So how do we take the desks off the reservation system if you're using a reservation system? How do we put verbal indicators in the workplace to someone that this desk should not be used? How do we change our conference rooms so that we have the right social spacing in those conference rooms? And I was talking to somebody the other day. I know I need to maintain my 6-foot distance, but when I go back to the workplace and I see that coworker that I've worked with for 20 years, we've not seen each other for 2 months, what happens if familiarity takes over and I want to go hug or touch or shake a hand or whatnot? So there's all these things that we need to think about as we bring our humans back into the workplace. Overwhelmingly, when on the CIO calls, as well as a lot of the real estate calls that I've been on, when people talk about reentry, a lot of people are saying, I need some things that I can do quickly. I need things that I can react to now. And, you know, Eddie, some of your ideas around technology are great, but I don't have time to implement that and get people to adopt it right now. So what can I do right now? And one of the probably the number one thing that we're seeing right now across the board, and Lori would love to get yours, Daryl's, Joe's reaction to this. We're seeing almost across the board, everybody saying, I need a checklist of things that I need to make sure that I do and help me understand what others are doing in their experiences so that I make sure I'm doing the right things for my corporation and my industry. But then more importantly, and I'll use the example of JLL, when our CEO says we're going to reopen our offices and here's the checklist of things that JLL will do, that's going to vary site by site. Has the location in the state of Georgia allowed to be reopened? The answer would be yes. I'm in Chicago. We're not allowed to be reopened in Chicago. So we've got two different things going on in our locations. What about what you're allowed to do in those jurisdictions? Has the landlord reopened the building? Do we have the right safety procedures for the amenities in the building? What about in the space? So we're seeing people say, I need a global checklist that everybody follows, but then I need site-by-site guidance to help people understand what to do, but then to also allow me as the director of real estate, as risk managers, to review what everyone's doing to make sure they're taking the right steps, to make sure that I've got a mechanism to communicate the changing requirements. So that checklist and the ability to do that type of communication and monitoring is the number one thing that we're hearing. Second thing that has taken on almost a life of its own, and I want you to think about this for a minute because we didn't even talk about this 6 weeks, 2 months ago. Contact tracing. First time I said that on a call, the comments blew up. You're not going to track people in the workplace. People won't allow that. Now the conversation's moved to, we know we're going to have to do it. Our health professionals are telling us, will you do it manually or will you do it in an automated fashion? And I can tell you, based on conversations I'm having, it's all over the board. There are some companies saying we'll have to do this manually. There's others saying we actually have some technology. We've got sensors in the building. We're going to change the badges. We're going to give people wearables. We're going to track where people go so that if, let's say, I'm in the office and I find out I'm tested positive the next day, they can look at the technology and they can tell Daryl, hey, you were with Eddie for 30 minutes. We need to get you to the doctor and to isolate. Lori, you were in the office but nowhere near Eddie, so you're probably okay. Be aware. But then also get that information over to our work order systems. Do our disinfecting, which is different from cleaning. Make sure that we do the right processes and procedures in place and then communicate to the employees so that we can help transform that fear to trust. So that's the second most biggest item that we see. You'll notice as we talk about on the right side of the slide, though, we get into reimagination and then implementing that new vision, and that's where a lot of the great ideas from technologies that some of us have actually started using before this, and we'll be able to take off and take advantage. But I would challenge others. Real estate historically has been a laggard in technology adoption. We no longer have that luxury. There's capabilities and abilities that will help us create a safer workplace. So whether it's increasing our use of touchless technologies, whether it's using the digital assistants that are emerging in real estate to be able to interact with the new smart elevators that are coming out, or what if I could just pick up my mobile device and tell it to book me into the conference room without having to touch the digital pad on the outside of the conference room. What if we can actually use the sensors in the building to track traffic patterns so that we can tell the work order system or the cleaning system where it needs to focus? We talked a little bit about the disinfecting. Your work order systems probably have capabilities to put the disinfectant type practices in place so that your people know how to do that, so you can track that they've done that. If PPE is involved, there are policies around that those work order systems and some other technologies can help you track. And then let's talk about space a little bit. I mentioned before the office space is not going away. I actually read a researcher say last night that he thinks we will have more office space eventually because people are going to look for the expanded spaces. Again, we'll see what happens every day as we go, but let's just say the workplace is going to change. And so how do we restructure those spaces? How do we allow people to book those spaces? How do we know that someone has sat at that desk? When Daryl comes in the next morning, sorry, I'm using your name a lot, Daryl, because you're beside of me on the camera, but when Daryl comes to the office the next morning, how does he know that Eddie sat at that desk and it was cleaned the right way before he sits down? Or how does he know which desk he can book? How do we make sure that there's the right social distancing, whatever that becomes, into place between us? And so there are so many technology opportunities that will emerge and that will change. And so I think my message to everybody will be, as I said, we will all get better together. And so talking through the different opportunities that are coming out, learning from people like Lori, what she's seeing going on in the industry and her strategic thinking and innovation and thinking about, is that right for my company? Talking to Daryl, who's on the front line. Okay, Daryl, you're re-entering today. What are you seeing? What are you learning? How can you help us be better? And all of us sharing that back with each other. In my opinion, that's how we use our industry to have the impact that we all know we can have to create these healthy workplaces for our people, to get our companies back into operation in a safe way, but also, and probably most importantly, the real people that are in our spaces. How do we help transform their fear into trust in the workplace, trust that we're doing the right thing, trust that we're focused on giving them a healthy and safe place to be. So like I mentioned earlier, if you agree with something I've said, reach out, let me know how you're approaching it. If you disagree though, challenge me. When we get to the Q&A, publicly challenge me. The important thing is we keep the dialogue going, we help each other, we work with each other as we go through the days and weeks and months ahead to be better together. So with that, I like technology because I'm a CIO, and there's lots of technology options that are out there and available. So it's my pleasure, Joe, to kick it over to you to talk about some of the trends that you're seeing from your perspective as we go through this new world that we're all living in.
Thank you, Eddie. I appreciate it. Yes, as Colette mentioned earlier, I'm going to be talking a little bit around how flexibility is enabled through technology, especially through these phases of upcoming potential adaptive triggering, and in general, I think we've all actually seen how technology can enable amazing flexibility, even over the last couple of months. From Eden's perspective, as we think about it as a business, we have over 1,000 companies for whom we're providing all the services around facilities, and also beyond that, managing the services, of course, and that's through our marketplace. We also have our software that companies are using. So it gives us an interesting view as to how ultimately technology can enable success and where people are being most successful and where the flexibility is provided. One thing that we've seen, through just building this business over the last few months, is there's three main levers that are enabling flexibility. One is, in the home. We've discovered particularly in the home right now that, even that capacity work from home is a flexibility enabled through technology. From the home office hardware to ensuring folks can avoid injuries with the correct furniture, to group collaboration software that is every day improving in leaps and bounds. We've seen that is an incredible lever that, if it hadn't progressed to the point that it did over the last decade or so, we'd probably be in a much different situation in terms of the reports around productivity that we've heard. Another way that flexibility is created through technology that's meaningful is reducing the risk for unforced property closures as we now prepare to open up a lot of different offices, or the ones that are already open. And the way you can reduce that risk is, there's lots of interesting examples how technology is being used right now. Software is, as Eddie mentioned, around ensuring social distancing, space planning, the way that we're leveraging Internet of Things to capture information on building systems, which is going to be more important than ever to make sure that we know the health of the buildings that we're in. And then I think another thing that's near and dear to our heart at Eden is avoiding a single point of failure. It's very easy if you're relying on a particular service provider to have a single point of failure. And we've discovered that if you leverage one thing that's become very important to us as we're overseeing client accounts is by taking a platform approach and making sure that there are backup providers in a platform who can claim any particular job, and that of course there's lots of redundancy built into the system. That matters a lot right now because a single point of failure can bring down the full facility operations of a client site, and so it's particularly important to take a platform approach in this moment. I think the final way that I wanted to mention that how technology certainly creates flexibility in this moment is improving the speed of reaction. Everything from we're seeing contact tracing that's enabled through various types of workflow software, tenant messaging applications. In this moment in time, speed is everything. In order to in one of those moments where something has been problematic is learned, or you're trying to quickly solve any sort of issue. And so enabling speed is something that technology does very well, and coordination. I think that the final thing that I would mention around, it's just more on the face of terms of like what flexibility can mean to us in this moment is it's important to be able to start and stop various services. And so I think it's something that we've discovered it can be very helpful when not just for, on-site services, but across the board, the flexibility that's enabled through technology to have more precision around what kind of service is on site, what is the duration of it, and, clients feeling more empowered to be able to turn on or off different types of services and software, because that in this moment is very helpful, and cost is also a consideration. So those are various ways that we've seen flexibility really be enabled through technology. But I think you can, in this moment, flexibility really will be everything, and continue to adapt. And I think this whole panel here we're very focused on enabling those sort of outcomes, through our various organizations. So with that, I think I'll hand it off to Lori.
Great. Thanks so much, Joe. And by the way, Eddie and Joe, it's really wonderful to hear technology guys talking about the people. So kudos to you. It works together as a system, doesn't it? But I love the content that you covered. Great job, guys. So I've been tagged with the responsibility of talking about innovation and strategy in the back to office. But I'd like to switch gears because I think that there is a lot out there around, are we going to need all this real estate? What kind of touchless environment are we going to have? Are we going to get mail delivered by drones? Robots to sanitize the office? And I think that stuff's really interesting. But in every one of the webinars I've been on, that's great. That stuff's really interesting for the future. But then I get questions about how to stand in an elevator and what percentage of alcohol should be in cleaning products. So I am going to talk about progressive back to work strategies, but I want to keep it real for everybody. I want it to be relevant and meaningful for you all. So think about the next few minutes as practical innovation and strategies as well. Okay. So the first thing I'd like to just point out is the decision process in back to office. And I would just like to encourage you all, the best way to manage the office environment is to have fewer people there, especially at the beginning. So don't rush back to the office. It's the best way to manage the constraint points and learning, because none of us have done this before. So start with a really small sampling and really focus on why do employees need to return. People have been working productively from home. Do they really need to come back? Chances are people that were needing to work from the office because of information security or physical security reasons, or they have filing constraints, or they require special equipment, chances are they're already working in the office and everybody else has been working remote. So if they're not tethered to the office, then the first question would be, why force them back to the office? If they're working productively, keep them working remote. And we're starting to see some big name companies in the news this week, even Google, Apple. In various countries, we're seeing companies not even considering coming back to the office in 2020. The earliest, in September. So just because the government entities say that you can go out and eat in a restaurant or get a tattoo or get a pedicure or whatever, don't feel the pressure to force your employees back to the office. There's still a lot of concerns. There's still a lot of things that we're sorting out. And there's a lot of communication and change management that we need. So don't feel that those dates are synchronous. We have some clients that are looking for CDC data, like in their region specifically. Is the curve flat in this area? What are the number of new cases? And it's a very regional thing. So again, I would just really encourage you to look at other reasons as to really challenge yourself as to why you need to bring those people back. And that simple philosophy will help be preventative in dealing with a lot of downstream constraints. The next thing I want you to think about is when you bring people back to the office, and this is maybe a little bit more futuristic too, but I want you to think about perhaps the office is not a place where we do individual work anymore. Perhaps the office will provide a different service to employees. Perhaps it becomes a place where we only go to collaborate, celebrate, interact, and that forming, storming phase of the team where you have to kind of be together to build that rapport and trust. And maybe the forming, storming, norming, performing is the cycles of team building. And it's really hard to start virtual teams up. So maybe once they've got their cadence and then they're in their flow, maybe they do more virtual. But think about the office as perhaps a center for collaboration instead of individual work. And we're seeing some clients actually jump the curve, keep people at home so that they can reprogram the office so that it's more hackable for agile work. We were already onto that topic, but this is maybe an opportunity to jump the curve and really adopt that in our back to work strategies. Keep people working remote. Obviously, the collaboration still has to follow the 6 foot or 2 meter rule. And then that's also going to help you with capacity because you're going to have to book some of those spaces. So that's another way to maybe jump the curve, get into something a bit more progressive, but still, maintain some of the safety considerations of performing individual work remotely or at home. The third item I want to underline is an area that I see is grossly omitted generally from the plans that I'm seeing, and that's governance. And that's how you enforce the policies. It's one of the biggest oversight areas I've seen so far. And if you set a policy and email it out to people, email a link, you're not going to change behaviors. There's a reason why you have to communicate 7 times. And people, they smoke, they drink too much, they have their own behaviors. You're going to have to find a way to coach them in the office so that they're following the standard health and safety procedures. Just setting up a policy and putting up a sign is not going to change behavior. So one of the things that we're advocating is leveraging that floor ambassador or floor warden concept to coach people in the moment. And quite frankly, often it's not belligerent behavior or resistance. It's just because they don't know. I was in the supermarket a couple of weeks ago. I didn't notice that they changed the aisles to one direction, and I was sauntering up the aisle the wrong way. And somebody said, "Hey, miss, did you notice you're going the wrong way?" And I didn't even notice because I was looking at something. And so just that friendly coaching in the moment to remind people, because they're drinking from the fire hose of knowledge and change. They can't possibly process or remember all of this stuff. So just providing kindness and coaching of people in the moment. Those ambassadors can do all kinds of other things too, by the way. They can do light FM work. We have them doing disinfecting, which I'll talk about cleaning in a moment, but also that change management support as well as providing great experience and productivity. So we're offsetting some of the costs to our clients by self-performing some of the cleaning activities and also putting it into a hybrid role where we're servicing the employee population in a very different way. So think about that floor warden role. There's another thing you might want to think about is just brushing up on your workplace violence protocols, and that HR and security and FM are well versed in them. And there's, again, been some things in the news recently about violent reactions to people trying to enforce those policies. So, with their heightened sensitivities to illness, and in certain countries, it's become a political statement if you wear personal protective or face coverings. So just please make sure that your violence protocols are up to date and include how to deal with those types of procedures, and your HR, security, and FM teams are versed on those protocols. And then the last thing I'll say about governance is monitoring landlords and vendors. So with vendors, one of the things we do is geofencing, so we know how much time they've spent in certain locations. That helps, but you also want to have another wave of quality oversight and control. And also of landlords. You've got to engage landlords even before people return, elevator protocols, building escrow, fire alarm procedures. There's all kinds of things that you need to think about. And if you're not comfortable with how the landlord has stepped up to addressing it, perhaps don't even locate in that building. We are going to see a lot more move to touchless. I don't think it's realistic to think that we're going to do major capital investments and modifications to a building in the first 90 days. But what I do encourage you to do is you're going through your journey mapping of the building to identify what are those touch points which equal high risk points, that you identify those and then go through the process of identifying the capital plan to convert that building. Just park it for now because you're not sure you might even be in that building in the future. You might use that building differently. But as you're going through, get economies of scale, identify those touch points, at least quantify the cost of that would require to upgrade the building and physical building, not just propping doors open and things like that. But at least take stake of what that would be so that it informs your decision whether to stay or reinvest in that location longer term as well. And again, you're not going to invest in those intrusive modifications if you're not going to stay in the building longer term. And that goes also with things like acrylic screens. We do recommend them in reception areas, but partitions and workstations, we think, it's a good thing to have, but you can also avoid that investment by staggering people in their locations. I think other things that are going to stick around for a while are continuous cleaning standards. So those 3 levels of cleaning that I think Ed mentioned at the beginning, cleaning versus disinfecting versus sanitization, and finding creative ways that we can do that. One of the things that we've done in our procedures is asked employees to take some responsibility for the cleaning. So microwave, you can't possibly have a janitor there standing and wiping the microwave handle. So taking some responsibility to wipe in and wipe out, we're calling it. It's kind of like the gym model. When you go to the gym, you get on the treadmill, you wipe it down before you get on and you wipe it down afterwards. Sort of similar model at your workstation. And obviously they will be clean, but we want people to have control of their psychological safety and security around cleaning, as well as the markers that we're leaving on desks, signs posted that indicated what the last time of cleaning versus disinfecting versus sanitization, just so that you're including that in the communication plan, but it also fits into your quality assurance as well. The next image is around communication. And I know we are really focused on the building and where to put the tape and block off workstations and cleaning standards, but please don't forget about the people. Their reaction and their concerns are heightened at a level that I've rarely seen. So making sure that you survey people before, during, and after the actual back to work, harvest that feedback and take action. We don't know everything. We haven't done this before. So crowdsource that feedback, find a process so that you can crowdsource that feedback from individuals, do a pulse survey, find out about their suggestions, what they're concerned about, and show that you're addressing their concerns and that you have a good process for that. Make sure that you include in your communication process HVAC maintenance. I'm getting that question a lot. So cleaning standards, what are the new standards? Can I get COVID for the air quality systems? How do you have those different conversations with the landlord to get that information and that assurances? So something as HVAC, which is benign and kind of invisible normally to the occupants or tenants, suddenly becomes something that's front and center. And also water. If you've had buildings that have been sitting for a while, flushing the building from water that's been standing to avoid from Legionella and other waterborne diseases, and water quality is also a procedure. Again, think about that in your communication process. It wouldn't be something you would normally consider. Find a balance between adequate messaging and reminders. Be careful of message overload. Complacency is a real threat. The people can become sign blind after a while. One of the things we did with a company was we turned their young leaders, who are all pent up and full of excitement and enthusiasm, to come up with a campaign to identify creative signage. And that's been a lot of fun. And again, it has to be respectful and tasteful. But one of the things that we had was somebody came up with, and I posted it on LinkedIn if you didn't see it, was a series of pictures of a dog wearing a face mask in different ways, as a headband, as an ear patch, an eye patch, and then properly over the nose. Just sort of a fun way of reminding people to follow the rules. That isn't oppressive. Like, don't use the red caution tape and the cones. Like, that's a sign of caution, and it doesn't really feed your mental security in the way that you're managing the space. And find a way to keep your leadership engaged and visible. And then the last thing around communications is I work with a bunch of engineers. We like to measure everything. We love the details. We love the outcomes. So find ways to measure success, and those are indicators of how you need to readjust and program the space. The last thing I'll say is be prepared for recurrence. Make sure that your business continuity and emergency management plans, and Joe, you mentioned it as well, anticipate that there will be another wave. We don't know if it will be bigger or smaller than this wave, but anticipate it. Somebody in your premises will have a reoccurrence. Work through a procedure of what would happen in a building by building basis. What is your plan when that does happen? How are you going to do contact tracing if you do that? How are you going to communicate to occupants? How are you going to de-escalate in the space? You really do have to run through those scenarios and be prepared in those particular situations. So a little bit more of the practical strategies of what you need to do, but a bit of a glimpse to the future. So that's it for me. I look forward to your questions either in the chat here, or please do follow up with me separately if we're not already connected on LinkedIn. And I'm going to just pass it over to our next terrific speaker, Darryl Smith.
Thank you very much, Laurie. And what a great panel. I think this is just an amazing content that's being presented. So I'm going to talk a little bit of what we're doing in the front line. So what are we doing? So relative to Micron, we have 30,000 employees in 19 countries. And everything we're doing when we're looking to bring team members or employees back is really around safety. You know, when are the triggers to bring people back? When does it make sense? Whether it's and it's different in each county, in each city, in each country. And so we have a checklist of everything that we need to do, and we create these packets that go to each site around the globe. They give them very prescriptive things of what they do. They report on it. And we actually have a global dashboard showing the readiness of, and it's not like a light switch. So it's not everybody went home and then now everybody is coming back to work. Kind of what Laurie's saying is it's a percentage of the roles that really need to be in return to work. So one of the things we did is we took all our floor plans globally, and we came up with, the WHO said 2 feet, CSC said 6 foot. We opted for 6 for 2 meter distancing, and we actually create a bubble. So we're using about 292 square foot. So if nobody moved in their office, it'd be great. But people move around, they rotate and circulate. And so what we're trying to do is really optimize this 292 square foot bubble. So what you see on a floor plan is a typical floor plan we'll send. It shows, depending on how many people are coming back, where are our one-way traffic, circulation. We have elevators that are in stairwells that, hey, we have an up stairwell and a down stairwell. We don't want people passing. The little pinch points, we actually have marking on the floor, hey, this could be where we'll have people that come together. And so we'll kind of be cautious here. And then in cafeterias, break rooms, a little bit to what Laurie said is, sometimes people have to police, meaning when you're making, you push a button on a coffee maker, we have sanitized wipes that they're wiping the buttons when they're done. Janitorial is going to be very visible. And so we're looking at the safety from where do people sit, and we're typically, for the first wave, we lose about 50% of our seats when you look at the first wave. And I think over time we'll go from the 2 meters to 1 meter, and maybe even the new normal is 1 meter. We don't get back to really where we were before. And so if I were to walk through a building, so for us, you come in, you see, first thing is a thermal scanner, and a security guard hands you a mask with sterilized tongs behind a plastic shield, very similar you see at the supermarkets. And so we're trying to limit any contact that could cause a problem. There's one-way circulations, there's specific areas, no mingling. Even in the break rooms, there's lines on where you stand. So we're keeping that separation. So we're being very prescriptive. And then some of the other areas that are important are around mechanical. So we focus at ventilation and filtration, everything from bringing more outside air in. Are all the systems working as designed? Are we, what's the filters look like? Are we having MERV 13s and really a lot of things to make sure we're optimizing the work environment for the employees coming in. And so the steps that we're taking, again, it's all around how do you keep people safe? If you're bringing people back to work and you're putting them in a box and say, don't talk to anybody, then you kind of don't need to come back to work. There's going to be collaboration areas like that. So in conference rooms, it was a 12-person conference room before. It's a 3-person conference room now. We really are prescriptive of where the chairs go. Nobody faces each other. And some of those kind of tactics to continue to drive the safety factor. And so the end result is we have consistency across the globe. So if we're looking at any of our buildings, this is consistent of what we would see. And we're only going to remove, when you see the darker areas, you're going to remove cubicles if we get to a amount of people where we need to do that to keep the one-way circulation, if we don't get to encroach that level, then we can really space people out. Then that's not a problem. But we have a pretty extensive checklist, and we've thought through this and spoken to experts and a lot of our peers, and a lot of our IFMA, other companies within IFMA, what they're doing. I think the final point here is you have to set up a strategy that works for you. Safety first, above all, and make sure you're communicating and collaborating with peers, because this is an ever evolving time. So, I appreciate what Eddie, Joe, and Lori said, and I think this is really a key moment for us to be aligned on how we look at workplace of the future. So, Colette, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, terrific. Thank all of you. I know hopefully our audience have learned a lot from your experiences, certainly the breadth of experience that you bring. So some of that's going to be reflected in the Q&A. We're receiving quite a few, so why don't we go ahead and start. One of the first questions, and it seems to be a reoccurring theme, is really around, do you have samples of work plans and policies that you can share with the attendees? And I think both JLL, Lori, your organization, obviously, and certainly Eden, all have examples and checklists and tools on your websites that people can go to. To Daryl's point earlier, we need to be transparent in today's environment so we can share information and collectively get through this as, even humanity works through this. So the next question. What do you do if you actually have a positive case in your workplace? Have you thought through some of the steps, or some of your clients really thought through some of the steps of what they're going to be doing next? And this is obviously one of the triggers that people are thinking about. If you want to go ahead, and anyone want to volunteer to share kind of your experience or some of the things that you're saying? Lori?
Hi, Colette. I'll just go over a couple of key points. The first thing is do some identification of who they've come into contact with at the office, so that they can be quarantined, and you can continue to contain the environment. The purpose of self-isolation is just to make sure that if if they do develop any symptoms, then they're in a controlled environment. But you need to do some contact tracing within the office just to see, who's had it, and so that you can self-isolate and, shelter in place basically and just monitor any symptoms. And 2 weeks is a minimum for that. The other thing is deep sanitization of the environment. And I think somebody mentioned, maybe it was Daryl, that restricting people by floor so that you're not allowing people to move up and down between the different floors is going to allow you to contain the environment that you will need to be able to treat, and also be able to track individuals as well. We're also seeing individuals look at like a platoon sort of format, if you know what I mean, where you have shifts or A and B shifts, so that, again, you can further contain based on that sampling of people. So you don't know if it was Tuesday, this group of people were in. So it's a little bit more managed and contained. But obviously the deep sanitization and that process, notifying the vendors. If you're in a landlord-based building, you have to have two-way communication, because you might be in a building where a landlord has found an instance on another floor with another tenant. You would want to know about that so you can make a decision what to do with your own employees. So I'm just giving you a few series, but to make sure that are in your emergency response plan. Those are some of the key ingredients that should be included. And I don't know, maybe some of the others want to build on those.
So, Colette, I can add, and I think Lori's spot on. We're seeing clients that are thinking through the things that Lori talked about. If they have an experience app that their employees are already using, where they're communicating with the space, either putting in work orders, or with some of the newer apps where they're getting occupant services, those clients are starting to think through the processes for how do we make sure the employees know how to communicate issues to us, but then how do we also be even more transparent than we've ever been. Yes, there was a situation. yes, we are cleaning it. Yes, this space. So, just that communication, all about, keeping people from being fearful. So we're seeing a big movement with people asking questions about that. And I'll also mention to folks, if you have an implementation of, we call it the IWMS, the big systems, work order systems, you probably already have capability that will help you through some of this, and you don't even know it. And I equate it to like Microsoft Excel. If you've ever used a nested V lookup in an if statement, you know how incredibly powerful that is. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's because you've never had to use it. You don't even know Excel has that capability. So you probably have something similar in your work order systems. So if you don't know, reach out and ask. A lot of those technology companies, by the way, are offering some of their capabilities for free to help people get through this if you've got an implementation. And so if people have questions about that, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn or email me. And same thing with the checklist. We've got a lot of checklists and suggestions that people can share, so don't hesitate to reach out for that stuff.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe just one thing to add that Eddie will appreciate is some companies have declaration apps that you actually fill out maybe 5 or 6 questions. Have you been sick in the last, have you been around someone who has and it's amazing how many people are connected. It's like, wow, that you checked yes to any of these. We really don't want those employees coming into the building. And so I think if you can do as much preventive stuff, whether through technology or those types of things, even before people get to the office, that'd be a great thing.
Oh, terrific.
We do that at our office, Daryl, and every employee at our company has to do it every day. There's an alert that goes at 6 a.m. and it's monitored and governed. And you'd be surprised at just that little prompt. It makes a big difference with people being mindful and pausing to think about their situation before they go anywhere. Yeah, great idea.
Great suggestions. So we're seeing quite a few questions come in, so that's terrific. I think the next theme that we're seeing is really around, we've talked a lot about technology, but much of this comes down to human behavior, right? And how they're actually using the space and taking responsibility even for their own health, kind of wiping down the coffee machines in those high touch areas. But there's been a lot of discussion around, Lori, you had brought it up, right? There's a floor warden or a day porter. We've seen them as community managers, but somebody that's actually designated in the organization on a particular floor within a particular area. Joe, this may be a question for you around some of your clients. How are they thinking about that role, and how can it help increase a safe environment?
Yeah, no, this actually ties across a few different points that people have made. I think one point that Eddie made earlier is the value of checklists in this moment. And we've found that a lot of our clients in particular, it's very important in this moment to make sure that the service partner is using an app that has a checklist. And that this checklist includes a number of things around continuous cleaning, to Lori's point earlier, and just enabling the day porter to very visibly be working through high frequency, high touch areas to make sure that the space is being cleaned and that the right things are being prioritized. And of course, other things that, this not just helps the space, be a lower risk space, but it also creates a lot of psychological safety for companies, because it helps to see someone in there who's continuously making sure the space is less likely to be one where people are going to end up infected. And we found there's a number of things. It's not just the person, a person who's a day porter who's visible throughout the day does create psychological safety, but there's a number of other things you can do to create psychological safety as well. Sanitation stations that are located always within eyesight of the space. Often, many that include things such as hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, also to a point made earlier, like people being empowered to clean their own space. To Lori's point, that's critical, and a lot of people are going to want to be the ones who are cleaning their own desk area, for instance, have the capacity to during the day. And in signage and in general, there's a lot of things we can do to create psychological safety in addition to day porters.
Terrific, thank you. Just looking at some of the themes. So how do you, when you think about the supply chain and the risk around the supply chain, when we look at different closures and then return to work, if we, as an example, in the fall, if we see in North America that we'll have another stay-at-home or closure of a few months, there are some suppliers that may not make it through the next round financially. And so that puts companies at risk, whether those are cleaning companies and others. How are you, and maybe we'll start with you, Eddie, and Lori and Joe and Daryl, how are you thinking about, or how are your clients thinking about mitigating this risk in their supply chain?
Lori and Daryl are probably closer to that than I am because I'm on the technology side. So I'll give a technology perspective, and then we'll get their real-world perspectives. I think the companies that have been faster to adopt some of the real estate technologies, or just technologies overall, are probably a little better positioned to deal with those inevitable waves that happen. If they've started thinking about how to flex in and out. And if you think about the way that we work with a lot of the suppliers, especially if I think about with JLL, the way that we integrate with them together on some of the technologies, the ability to help them flex up and down in that situation can enable them to roll with us. So the key is, at least for us, helping clients keep their facilities open and manage through the days and the waves. And I think if we're successful at that has, I mentioned earlier, getting our companies back up and operating has an impact on all of us because of the economic effect. I think that working together and making sure that we are together managing the healthy workplace and managing the waves and communicating and using the checklists will enable us to, flex. We're going to have those waves we probably have to deal with, but be able to flex up and down and help those who help us also get through it. Don't have a silver bullet. That's just the way that we're thinking right now. And again, I think things are going to change on the daily, weekly basis, and having forums like this to communicate and help each other is going to be absolutely critical for a lot of us in the coming days. So Daryl and Lori, that's like a technology perspective. You guys are more like real frontline dealing with those situations.
Daryl, I can quickly jump in, and then please feel free to build on what I'm going to say. We basically do four main things. The first thing that we did was we amended our vendor contracts so that if we needed additional service or less service, then we had the ability to do so. So it gave them some upside for some additional cleaning, as well as, there's some times where we have to pause. So we did quickly amend those contracts. We are diligently monitoring the financial health, and we know a lot of the leaders of the companies to be able to make sure that they are going to continue to be able to provide services. And we do have secondary suppliers and tertiary suppliers in some instances that we can rely on. So we've got some depth in our supply chain. We also do a lot of self-perform of our work. And then the fourth thing we do is we've probably in the last 3 months, I think Gord said last week, we bought about $160 million of supplies, including masks and cleaning materials. And so we've been able to give our clients leverage as well as supply. So that's another way that we've been able to manage continuity of the provision of services. There's no sense installing those hand wipes if we're going to run out of supplies, for example, or run into supply constraints. So there's a couple of dimensions that we've done contractually, both in the supply chain, in providing options, as well as supplies to be able to mitigate some of the risks.
And maybe just to add, so that was great. I think the other thing is having open dialogue with the suppliers. So, for example, when you say deep cleaning in Asia, that means totally different than in the U.S. When we talk about food service and cafeterias, that we want to remove salad bars, we want to make sure that we're following the same process consistently that has the heightened amount of safety, and understanding the investments that our suppliers are making for their employees, because their employees obviously need to be safe as well. So that whole supply chain, financial health, absolutely, but understanding that there's clear communication and expectation.
So that brings us to the end. Sorry, Joe. I know we've got 1 minute left. So I think Chris is going to join us to close this out. I can't thank you enough for you, just all four of you, to really come here. I know you're really busy with your clients and share your insights and knowledge. So thank you. Hopefully the audience also found this worth their time. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you. And again, happy World FM Day, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much, Colette, and thank you to all of the panelists. This was a really incredible session. Thank you for coming on and sharing all of your insight. Episode 9 and 10, as you see up on the screen, will be discussing the pandemic manual just released from the IFMA Foundation. So that'll be May 20th and the 27th. And as we've mentioned, this session and all the other past episodes are available on our Coronavirus Resource Center. So for all registrants and attendees, we will be sending you the full recording of this session. Happy World FM Day, everybody. Thanks again to all the panelists, and thank you to all the attendees for your great questions.